It was missed. Dude, but for sure, this book was like, it was hard in the sense, like, it's very like a practical book, you know, porque tienes que hacer cosas. It's not like just reading, like it's trying to engage you, do things. So it's hard when you're.
This is the first. Is it the first self book? The first self book that we do. I guess the previous one, self-help book. I believe the previous one was sort of self-help, but this is like, it takes it to the next new level. Like, it has places where you have to put in your ideas and fill it out.
Yeah. No, yeah, this is straight up a self-help book, right? Like it's like, I have a little summary for the book. I'm going to share this. Do you have one? Or you want me to share this one I have here?
No, I think it's perfect. Tell our listeners what we read this week.
Okay, this week we read Designing Your Life by Bill Burnett and Dave Evans. So Burnett and Evans are both professors at Stanford University. They guide their readers through a series of practical exercises and mindsets to help them build their way forward. The book introduces the concept of using design thinking to create a fulfilling life. It emphasizes that everyone can benefit from approaching life as a designer, focusing on building and iterating rather than passively waiting for things to happen. That's kind of a little summary of the
pretty
book.
Good summary. I mean, that gives our listeners a perfect idea of what we went through this last couple of days as we took on the journey of designing our life.
I think we have to acknowledge that. A little caveat for who's listening. Our goal for this podcast is do weekly books, right? And this was the longest book we've read thus far. It's 199 pages on my tablet. I don't know how much actual pages.
Not only is, I mean, it's not that long per se in word count. It's kind of, you could probably do it in a week, pretty doable if you don't stop to think about it. But it's kind of a heavier book. So when you hit a part that kind of like resonates with you and you start thinking, you can spend 20 minutes just thinking about a chapter, and it makes it a slower read. So
yeah, and it even invites you to stop. It invites you to, write things down. It even gives you time limits. Try to do your best to do it in 30 minutes. So it is a book you need to be engaged with. And then anyone who purchases this book, I mean, not everyone, but if you're buying this book, it potentially means that you feel like you want to change in your life, and maybe some guidance, some practical guidance of what you could do differently than what you're doing now.
It's kind of like a little background story to this book. Throughout this podcast, we pick books at random sometimes, but this first couple of weeks, there's been kind of a story behind all the books we picked. The Little Prince, the one we did last week. This one has a little bit of a deeper story. So when I was introduced to this book, actually someone bought it for me. Like, I didn't buy it for myself. I found this online post advertisement where they were advertising, I believe it was career counseling. Like, you can meet with someone and talk about your career goals, what you want to do, and what changes you want to make. So I said, you know what? I don't lose anything. Let's meet with this person. And actually, it ended up being a very good conversation. At the end of that counseling session, we could say, she told me she recommended this book. And to my surprise, a couple of days later, she mailed it to me, the counselor.
Really?
So, yeah. So it was a pretty, I mean, I didn't pay anything for the counseling session, and I got the book, and it was a pretty good book. That's why we're doing it today.
Well, that means that she's really passionate about helping people. If she's just, she saw something in you and then like, let me give this for free. This guy can get a little extra push.
Yeah, and I think her entire, maybe not her career, but at least this part of her career as far as I went and my goals, her goal, if I were to continue with her, was to kind of go over this book together. Right. So she got it for me in the hopes that I hired her. And then we ended up doing this journey of designing your life and your career.
Her marketing tactic didn't work.
I mean, maybe it did. I don't know. Maybe in the future we'll end up doing it. So now let's kind of introduce or kind of segue into how it would benefit our listeners if they don't get to read the book. What are the key points that they can take from this? But even if they decide to read the book, what to watch out for? Like, and to introduce that, like, one of the things that I really liked about this book is that throughout the book, it asks you to think, or like it labels it dysfunctional belief and then a reframe. So a lot of times we hold on to this idea. Like, it can be a common saying, for example, this first one is, if you are successful, you will be happy. That's a dysfunctional belief. A lot of people have that idea that it takes success, whatever their definition of success is, to be happy. And a possible reframe for that is true happiness comes from designing a life that works for you. And I think there's a lot less pressure in that, because a life that works for you doesn't have to have, a lot of money signs or a lot of things that people might equate to success in their eyes. It just works for you. That's kind of what works for you. And for some people, being frugal and living a life of freedom is a lot more important than having a high paying career. And this book kind of allows you to allow yourself, or gives you that freedom to, you know what? I can design a life that works for me and be happy doing that, instead of trying to make my life fit this other mold that people have for their life.
Yeah, and I think it introduces to question, what mold am I in? Am I following a mold that just isn't working for me? And I think that is a key component of this book. I think we can just, if we just talked about all the dysfunctional beliefs, that right there is probably the episode, because there's so many that these dysfunctional beliefs that I agree with, that I feel like a lot of people have. The one I had that I felt like I not related to, but I've heard before, is especially when you're going out of high school, that you should already know what you're going to do with your life. And the reframe is, life is an iterative process of exploration and discovery. It's okay not to have all the answers and to change paths as you learn and grow. And that mindset is, that pressure more so is so real, especially again in first world countries that have a normal schooling system that pushes college. I think it gave an example of a counselor that someone asked for advice, and I said, "Oh, what are you passionate about?" And the person says, "Well, I don't know what I'm passionate about." And the counselor replies and says, "Well, come back when you find out what you're passionate about." People use this word as passions, like this one thing that you were meant to do. But the reality is, as people, as humans, we like multitude of things, and that's okay. And I feel like this reframe, again, like you mentioned, kind of put some weight off your shoulders. Like, try this out and see how it works. And if it doesn't work, it's okay. It's not a failure. You learned something new.
Yeah. And I mean, not only that, but it's never too late, right? Like, some people think that you have to have it figured out since you're 15, 18, 20 years old, what you want to do, what you're passionate about, and pursue that without any hiccups. Like, you're just going to go from point A to point B, and it's going to be a perfect ride. But the reality is that it doesn't work out like that. In fact, I think it gives a data point in here. It says in the United States, only 27% of college graduates end up in a career related to their major. So that means only 27% of the people actually got it right, in a way of saying, this is what I want to do, and then ended up doing that thing. A lot of people don't have that journey from, point A to point B in a straight shot.
That blows my mind. Like, when you read that stat, how did that impact you? I feel like I've heard other versions of this stat, but like seeing it like concrete what the number was, like it really impacted me.
Yeah, I mean, it's a sad realization to see that, in a way, because when you're young and you're trying to start a life, when you're in high school, like, if you try to transport yourself back to that time when there's a lot of questions, not a lot of answers. At least for me, there wasn't a lot of answers. I didn't know what to do, and a lot of pressure, right? Like, you think that if you're smart, if you're intelligent, you have it figured out, but that's not the case, and I mean, it's a sad thing that life is designed that way for young people to kind of create this or make these big choices so early on. I mean, I feel like it is, because even in the book, it mentioned a very good example. It said, when you buy a car, like, you test drive it first. right? You go and you test drive it, and then you commit to it. In life, like we take on new jobs like across the states, across a continent, without even knowing if you actually like this career. And a lot of times you find out there's a scenario or there's an example, because this book kind of, opposite of what we see mostly with books, where there's a book first and then a movie. There's something before this book, and that's a class. In Stanford, if you go to Stanford, you can take a class, an elective class, that is designing your life. And they basically go through this book in class. The course takes you through that. And in it, one of the students that went through it mentioned that they had decided they were going to open a coffee shop. So they saved up, they opened the coffee shop, huge success, right? Like a lot of people were loving it, but the owner found out that she was miserable. Like she hated it because she had jumped into this new career, into like all the way, committed a lot of money and resources and time without actually realizing if she even liked owning a coffee shop. And I feel like young people are forced to do something very similar when they're 18 years old, when like you're forced to make a decision on what you want to study and do the rest of your life. And maybe you haven't even had a chance to do something and figure that out.
I think part of it is because you feel like you don't know what to do, right? Like you feel like it's like lack of knowledge almost, or and lack of guidance. Not to hate on any guidance counselors out there, but because like it gives the example, I mean, to your point, where it poses the questions like what could have she have done differently, or he have done differently? He could have shadowed someone at a local coffee shop, see the back end of it, see if he could see the managerial side of owning a coffee shop. And seeing how that affected them emotionally. Maybe instead of like like owning a coffee shop, maybe this person likes designing coffee shops, but because again, and that's where I have like a trouble thing, because like I kind of relate to the full throttle mindset. Like for me, it's like just run and gun it, but there is a lot of wisdom. There's a lot of wisdom if you can shadow somebody or put yourself in circumstances to see a little bit the life that you potentially might live through the experience of someone else, to do it, to take advantage of it. Shadowing somebody, even if it's for free, the time you save, right? Like if you go to college 6-7 years for whatever degree, and then you realize once you're in the job, in the career, that you don't like it, like it's not a waste because you learned so much, but maybe you could have learned it earlier. You could have learned that lesson earlier.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is kind of book we can go in order, in chronological order. And the first chapter introduces us to this concept of knowing where you are. Start where you are. If you haven't gone to college, start from there. Start designing your life at that point. If you already went to college and you love it, but there's some aspect of your life that you don't like, well, start designing there. And if you've gone to college and you don't love your career, well, there's no reason to just... I feel like I've heard this from a lot of people where they've committed a lot of time or resources into a career. Turns out they hate this, whatever it is that they're doing, whether they're in the medical field or another type of job that they just despise. And they think that just because they already spent the 4 years or the amount of money that they spent in the career, that there's no going back. That now they're stuck for the next 40 years. They have to do this thing that they hate.
That's crazy.
And, to some degree, you have to be responsible, right? You're not going to just quit your job that pays you well and go pursue some crazy dream. But if you start designing your life, it might take you 3, 4, 5 months to figure out a path forward. But you can start taking these small little steps to figuring out something that makes you a little bit happier. And in here, it goes over the dashboard, the health/work/play/love dashboard.
Oh yeah.
And it's kind of it's kind of an invitation for anyone that reads this book to kind of be honest with themselves and respond the question, where am I now? Like, how happy or fulfilled am I in every one of these areas? You could be extremely successful at work, but find that you're not happy because you're lacking in these other 3 areas, which are also important. So if you know where you're at, then you can kind of figure out, okay, what can I do to improve my life and make this something that I enjoy more?
And the book highlights, or the authors highlight more so, that there isn't a perfect balance. I think that there's not a perfect anything. The important thing is to finding maybe the areas that you're lacking the most and start there and work
Yeah.
and take actions to fix that area of your life. I wanted to pose that question because you mentioned that quote that you can't know where you're going until you know where you are. How important do you think is self-assessment to actually make progress? And do you think people even do any self-assessment, especially in especially young people, right? Like, do you think that's common?
Yeah. Well, I think it's kind of one of those things that it's really hard to be honest with yourself, especially if you're unhappy, right? If you sit down and you say, okay, I don't like this, you might feel attacked by yourself. And that's not an easy feeling, right? Like you might feel like,
Yeah.
oh, but I should like this. I should do,
Yeah.
like, this is what I decided. And if you take the time and you have the honesty enough to be able to determine where you are, I feel like it's the only way to get somewhere else. Because if you don't know where you're going, then maybe you're already there, or maybe you're completely going in the wrong direction. But if you assess, or if you have a good assessment of where you are right now, I feel like that's like the first step. And I mean, that's what the authors describe. Like you start where you're at, and once you know that, I have like a pretty good compass of where you belong and what makes you happy. Then you can start trying to head in the right direction.
Yeah. And something that was cool that I found cool is that they're in Stanford. They have in that class that you were mentioning in the beginning, they have a quote that says, "You are here." And it
Yeah.
highlights that very point that you're alluding to, that you can't change the past. Like the decisions you made, like good or bad, like were made. And the important thing is that you're here now. And what are you going to do about it, right? Like, are you going to
Yeah.
continue this pattern that you're living, even though you're unhappy potentially?
Mm-hmm.
Or are you going to just do something different, change that
Yeah.
pattern? And I think I really value that quote. I think I'm gonna have to fill up this wall of just quotes of all these books that we're reading. I thought that was a really good one. I mean, there's so many, but that was like one that I liked a
Yeah.
lot. Like, you're here. Like, what are you gonna do?
Yeah, exactly. And I feel like what I really enjoyed about the book is that they're not really promoting one way of life over another. Everyone's different, right? Like some people, college and career and being a professional might be the only path they see for whatever reason. If you read this book, it's not going to attack that idea that you have. Other people might be completely contrary to that, and they don't want to spend the money or the time to go to a 4-year college and get a degree. They want to pursue a different route. If you read and understand some of the concepts in the book, it's going to help you design your way forward and what you want to do in life. Because I think the book, other than teach me like different exercises that I can do to kind of know what I want to do and how to move forward, it also highlighted some of the dangers of not being aware of this, right? Because we as humans can spend a lot of time working on a problem, but then realize, oh, that was the wrong problem. Like I solved it in a way, but it wasn't really what the issue was, right? And think of all the people that jump from job to job because they're unhappy, and then they go to the next job. Maybe they get paid more. Maybe they get paid a lot more. Within a couple of months, they're unhappy again. I think it comes back to the fact that they were attacking the wrong problem. The pay wasn't the problem. The job wasn't the problem. Maybe there's something else in their life that's leading to that dissatisfaction in what they're experiencing.
Yeah, and I think and it's such a simple little gauge, little dashboard. He compares it to a dashboard of a car and like seeing like a check engine light on if it isn't fulfilled. Are we gonna put ourselves on blast? Like, did you fill this out for yourself?
I actually didn't have the time to do all of the exercises, but I did fill that one out.
Okay. You don't have to share all the red lights we got going on in our lives, but I can. I did. I was surprised at the one that was lowest for me.
Okay. Share yours and I'll share mine because mine surprised me as well. I did do this exercise.
I mean, it's not. So the dashboard, and we already mentioned it, but it's work, play, love, and health, and you just measure it. It's basically split in quarters, and you can fill it in as you wish, as you please. For me, the lowest was play. Um, I wrote down like the things that I genuinely enjoy, and I think that's why it poses it. Because like before this, I thought like, oh yeah, I have a healthy balance, and I like and it
Mhm.
defines play as just things you do for enjoyment.
Yeah.
It didn't talk about like competitive things like, oh, because I want to beat somebody. That's joyful. That can be fun, but it doesn't talk about that. It
Yeah.
compares it like the child joy of playing with mud as a child. Like it's just purely this brings you joy. And for me, like I didn't really have a lot of things. I just brought just complete just joy. I think. Let me see what I wrote down. Um, but two things I wrote down that where I just enjoy the time that I'm spending in regards to play is this what we're doing here. I
Yeah.
just really truly enjoy this. It's a lot of fun, and just like watching YouTube videos to learn like things that I
Yeah.
like to, whether it's photography or whatever. Those are the two things, and the things I remember I used to love to do a lot that I haven't been able to do since I moved to Mexico. Was like, for example, playing soccer with my friends. Like that was
Yeah.
something that brought me so much joy. It wasn't about winning. It was just going hanging out with friends and like it reminded me of like, man, I haven't done that. Like, and that
Yeah.
brought me so much satisfaction. So then anyway, that was one bar for me that was a little low. And I put health at 50%. I don't think I'm terrible, but I can improve. My work, I feel like it's like 3 bars. I think there's
Mhm.
goals I want to keep growing on. I'm trying to grow these work goals, and then love like 4, like almost full. I'm
Okay.
doing really good. I'm very grateful for that too. But
Sounds
yeah,
good.
that's kind of my little assessment.
It's funny that we shared that. I was surprised to find that the play bar was pretty low as well. And I think maybe the reason is that I'm kind of thinking incorrectly about some of the things I do because I've have this concept of life where you should enjoy what you do, whether it's a responsibility or not. Like, but if you start thinking of all the benefits, maybe you're not doing it just for fun and merit. Like you're doing it for some benefit. For example, I can tell you about soccer. Like I regularly play soccer with friends, but maybe behind it, I'm thinking, oh, it's good cardio. It's for my health. Like so that's why I
Oh,
didn't count it for play. Like it was more like I'm thinking of the benefit of that, and the same thing can happen with other things. But I think, yeah, I mean, doing things just because you enjoy doing them is something that kids probably have a leg up over us, where we start
yeah.
thinking of the best way to, improve our life and do things that are different. But I mean, things that make you happy and play is a big part of that. We should work on that one. We should fill
Yeah.
it up more.
And the thing I started like this is where it stopped me a little bit. This book of like, okay, like what do I what brings me joy, like true, like just normal joy. And I realized like it's things that I could practically do, like I did it yesterday because I was reading this book, finishing it up. And for example, like I love like watching the sunset. Like I love that. It brings me
Yeah.
joy. But like because of work, because what I'm doing, I just don't take the time to like sit down and just do that. Just don't do anything else. Just do that. So yesterday my wife and I went up, Lynette and I went up to the top floor and watched the sunset. And
Nice.
like that brought me so much joy. But like the thing is like the first sign is acknowledging something you got to work on. But then the second thing is like, okay, what can you practically do now? And then do that thing.
Yeah.
So that was like my first little step of like trying to better that area, I guess.
Yeah, and apply it in your life. Yeah, I mean, and I think this exercise of building that dashboard kind of takes you, or it's like the perfect segue into the next chapter of building your compass in life, right? Because the reason you want to know how you're doing in all these places of life, like work, love, health, is so you can find out if you're living a life that's true to your worldview, but also I think it mentions here your work view and your life view, right? And the difference between these two is one of them could be related more to like your career, the things that you do for work, and the other one is just life in general. I think here it gives a very good description of what he means by life view is simply your ideas about the world and how it works. It's a pretty simple, simplistic way of finding if you know what your life view is. And your work view is more related to work. And go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to mention that these questions that he poses the reader to question himself or herself, like why am I here? What am I doing? Why does it matter? I think it's questions that a lot of people don't ask themselves that much anymore. For whatever reason, because we're always distracted, we just go like in life. Like we just go, we
Yeah.
don't stop and like, okay, what am I standing on? Like why am I doing what I'm doing? And again, this is a great book to do these exercises to pose these questions and see what you could do differently.
Yeah, exactly. And at the end of the day, what you want to have is like a life that integrates, right? You don't want your work view or whatever it is that you do for work to completely clash with what you think of life, right? If you're a vegan, but you work at a slaughterhouse, you're gonna have some issues. Like you're gonna have some problems in your head. Like there's a
You will
direct
be
conflict.
crying every day as you go to work.
So the same thing, man. If you're doing something that you love for work or that's very successful, but you're spending too much time doing it, and your life view is more like spending time with family and doing things that you volunteer for, things that don't involve money, then you might feel that, internal conflict growing inside of you of like, maybe I should change the direction of where my life is going.
Yeah, and there's this example of Parker Palmer that I love, that I feel like could potentially be relatable to people, that he was very successful and he emulated these like famous leaders, what he
Mm-hmm.
thought would be a good life. And he thought that imitation was more important than being authentic to himself. But he was using someone else's compass to basically lead his life. And even though it's not a bad life, he was able to admit that he realized this, that he was being guided by someone else's standards, even though they're not bad. Nothing's wrong with acknowledging someone's great life course. It doesn't mean that you can copy and paste it to your life and then you're going to
Yeah.
be happy.
Yeah, actually, that's one of the parts of the book that I highlighted to share with the listeners. Is this actually, this paragraph kind of summarizes. It says there's a lot of powerful voices in the world and lots of powerful voices in our heads, all telling us what to do or who to be. And if we're not careful, we all run the risk of accidentally using someone else's compass and living someone else's life. And that's very true, right? Like, especially with social media and all these important things that happen and all these things you listen to, you can start wanting, like, for example, Parker, he wanted to be like Martin Luther King and Gandhi, but then later he realized that he didn't have to walk that same path to learn from them and take those lessons and extract them.
How, I mean, again, this is like, man, for me, like I'm very grateful that of being, whatever influences has gotten me to this point that I am now. I'm very grateful because it's scary to think. I'm scared of regret. I think it's something we've talked about even when we were younger, just together. Like I'm really scared of regretting a decision. Um, so my way of combating that is, I'd rather regret a decision I made than a decision I never made. Like I hate regretting a what if. Like just do it,
Yeah.
and then if it fails, it fails. Like I'd rather regret the failure than regret not knowing what would have happened. And
Yeah.
like when I read this, like, man, I wonder how many people are just going through life almost like in cruise control with someone else driving their car, so to speak, not knowing where they're going, why they're going there, and they're dissatisfied. And that's such a sad and scary thing. So that's why it's so important to readjust or see if your balance, your work view, life balance is correct, because you can get there. You can fall back to those habits because we're being influenced heavily by everything, really.
Yeah. I mean, I think that paragraph and that chapter in general made me meditate on that, right? Because even if you're doing the right things, even if you're, you know, ticking those boxes and people are applauding you along the way, if it's not really you, if you haven't done enough self-reflection to make that path yours, what could happen, maybe years down the line, maybe at an age that I can't even comprehend yet, 50, 60 years old, looking back now, you might be like, oh, dang, why did I do that? Like, that wasn't really me. I was just doing it because my friends were doing that or because someone else was taking that path. And the good thing is that if you have the right relationships and they're good friends, I feel like those mistakes probably won't be as big as you imagine. And if you're listening to the right people, but it's still not going to be yours, right? It's still not going to be the real you.
Yeah, and whenever, let's say you're 60, right? But like the important thing is what are you going to do next, right? Like again, like what benefit is there to ponder and just hurt yourself of
Yeah.
past decisions? You can't change the past. So again, like it's never too late, so to speak. You can start changing certain habits or trying to reach certain goals and plan. Just
Yeah.
and it highlights the quote. Let me pull it up. That what we're discussing reminds me of this. Designers don't think their way forward. Designers build their way forward. So it's referencing that it's something in motion. You're doing something to design that life. You're not just thinking about it. You're not just drafting that whatever, right?
Yeah.
Building, right? You're actually putting hands to work and doing something about it.
Yeah. It's kind of a cool little concept, right? And it's kind of the center of this book, this idea that you can design your own life very similar to the way products are designed, like the way our phones get to us, or way our, different tools that we use get to us, whether they're complex or simple. There's design behind it, and the same thing can be done around your life. And rarely do people do that. I mean, I've never had a class in high school up until now that I'm reading this book that kind of took that approach towards life. It was more like decisions were made at you instead of you making decisions about your life. Like, I don't know if that makes sense. For example, you apply for college, but they're the ones that get to reject you. Like, you really have no control over some of these things, and it's just the way life is kind of panned out. Whereas if you design your own life, even if that's a closed door, okay, you keep designing forward. A failure, something that fails doesn't make you a failure. You can continue going. And if you have that
Yeah.
approach of I'm building something, it's not going to matter as much as if you think life is just, something that happens to you and you're a victim in a way. I mean, that's a big issue, especially with younger generations where we feel like, oh, I'm a victim to something that's happening to me.
Yeah, and to your point, it's almost like through life, there's been roads paved for us. Like you can choose a road basically, but this book is inviting you just build your own road. Like, yes, there's default roads to take if you want, but the reality is the likelihood of your happiness is better if invested if you just build your own road and your own pathway instead of
Yeah.
just following whatever you feel like everyone's doing.
Yeah. I think you're right. Like I was gonna try to get the listeners to focus on one point of this book because I mean the reality is designing your life is more than just about your job or your career. There's different components to it. There's family, there's your relationship with others, with the community. Your health is a big part of designing your life and what you do towards that. But if you focus just on your career, just on your job, which I imagine a lot of people that read this book actually pick it up for that reason, for that purpose. They want to make a big change in their career, whether it is in a career that they already have or one they want to pursue. Now, here it talks about that. And if we focus the conversation on getting unstuck, right? Let's say you feel stuck, whatever it is that you're doing. If you feel like you're not moving forward or you don't like where you're at, but you don't know what else to do, like, what advice did you get from the book that our listeners could apply and potentially get unstuck? What did you find?
I think the practical thing that I feel like you can start with was identifying the things that bring enjoyment in your life.
Hmm.
So, chapter 3, or I'm not sure if it's chapter part 3, talks about wayfinding to
Yeah.
understand where to go next.
Yeah.
And it highlights the practical point that I found useful is to start a journal. He called it a good time journal, and he says when you learn what activities reliably engage you, you're discovering and articulating something that can be very helpful in your life. Design work. Remember that designers have a bias to action, which is just another way of saying that we pay a lot of attention of doing things and not just thinking about things. Logging when you are and aren't engaged and energized will help you pay attention to what you're doing and discover what's working. So the first thing to do, or the advice I would give based on this book, is do not change anything. Don't freak out. Don't quit your job. Don't let me start selling my liver or something. Don't first see what you enjoy. Like what are things that are bringing happiness and engagement. Talks about the flow state, which is something that you're totally engaged, that you
Hmm.
feel like time just blurs by. And identifying those things, you can now okay okay. I really enjoy, let's say, during my work, there's a time where I'm problem solving, and I just love that. It makes me feel valuable, acknowledged for the work I'm doing. That brings me a lot of happiness. But I hate all the meetings I'm in. Well, it gives you a problem to be solved. Instead of like, oh, I have to quit my job, maybe we can just talk to our boss and acknowledge the things we're really good at and we're really enjoying, and see if we can do less of the other things. And
Yeah.
that right there can be one step closer to just improving your life. And it's such a practical thing. It's just being engaged in the moment and then tracking those things. What
Yeah.
about you?
I mean,
Would you recommend?
I think you touched on a point that I had almost skipped, and that is the idea of flow, right? And in the authors call it those activities that you do where you feel like time stands still. Like you're not really, if this took another hour, you wouldn't care. If it took another 2 hours, you probably don't care either. You're just enjoying it. And it mentions here, you're neither bored because it's too easy, nor anxious because it's too hard. So you could be doing something that you love, and you're not gonna find it. You're not gonna be bored doing it. It's not gonna be that easy that you just like clicking enter on a spreadsheet. But it's also not gonna be so demanding that you're like, oh, I can't do this. And if you find things in your life, it might be even more related to play than anything, right? And you start thinking and kind of writing those things down. At the best, you're gonna end up with a list of things that you really enjoy doing. And from then you can move on to getting unstuck, right? Because if you're doing something you hate, the idea would be to do something that you can make a living on, but you don't hate, or potentially that you love. Well, what if
Mhm.
you don't even know what you like? Well, that's like the first step, right? Create a list of all the things that you enjoy doing, the things that maybe you find that you're entering a flow state where you where time kind of stands still, where you're enjoying this. And it's something that really resonated with me in that chapter about getting unstuck, is that there's more than one, right? If you think that there's only one possible version that you can live your life, you're wrong. Like you could be a teacher, you could also be a mechanic, a pilot. A lot of people, if you share those interests, could take different routes. Whereas if you think, oh, there's something better I can be doing, that idea of, oh, there's a better way, there's a best way, is very dangerous to life design, according to the authors, because it kind of makes your mind only think about one option. If you're doing
Yeah.
this, okay, I should not be doing that. I should be doing this one thing. Whereas if you start to see about all the different things you enjoy, and maybe even start attaching other ideas about work related to those things that you enjoy, you start creating these different paths, right? Like, on one version of this, Carlos can be a business owner and he has control of his time and he does this. And the other one, he's going to be a full-time employee for a nonprofit that does something that he really enjoys and he wants to promote. That's another version that Carlos would be very happy doing. Well, if you create multiple versions of this, you might start getting an idea of, okay, what kind of things do I want to pursue? And I think that's the first step to getting unstuck, right? Having already ideas in your head. If you have this concept of, oh, I can create ideas, it's actually one of the dysfunctional beliefs that says, I am stuck. You can reframe that to, I'm never stuck because I can always generate a lot of ideas.
Yeah.
You're
Hey,
only
that's such
one
a
idea away.
powerful thing. Yeah, it's just one idea away, and then but an actionable idea, right? That's the whole
Yeah.
concept of this. Is like I think that I want to just reiterate the danger of thinking there's only one option. Like
Yeah.
only if I get a raise or only if I make X amount of money will then I be happy. Or like sometimes we make these absolutes instead of attacking the real problem. And that's what this book is trying to guide you. Like, what is the real problem?
Yeah.
Are you lacking materially? Oh no, I'm not. Then why would money solve anything?
Yeah.
Then what are you frustrated about? Like, oh, I don't have control of my time. If I make more money, maybe I can build another business to then free up more of my time. Okay, then money isn't the issue. It's okay, you want to have more time. So it breaks down these problems um, just in chewable pieces where, okay, like I can solve this one brick at a time. And then eventually you'll have a wall, but like you can slowly start building instead of being overwhelmed that only if this happens will I then be
Yeah.
happy. Or and then you're just stuck if you have that mindset. You just really are stuck.
Yeah. And it's kind of a funny phrase that the authors came up with, what they call some problems gravity problems.
Oh yeah.
And that's really cool
Yeah.
because they're basically saying, if your problem is so big, like something like gravity, right? Like if you're taking a bike ride and you're like, oh, I hate it that it gets really heavy when I'm going uphill. Well, that's gonna happen. Like you can maybe try to getting a lighter bike or getting stronger, but that's always gonna be there. Gravity is always gonna make it hard for you to go uphill. The same thing with some of the problems that we complain about, right? Like it gives an example of a poet. It's like, oh, writing poetry doesn't pay enough. Well, maybe you'll never pay enough. Like if you're
Yeah.
a poet, you're doing it for the love of poetry. Like it shouldn't be for money. Those are gravity problems, and I think it's very important when we're analyzing our life and kind of where we feel stuck, that we're not battling these gravity problems because we're not gonna win. Like it's just not gonna happen. These are as big as gravity itself. Like you cannot go against it for long.
And I think a lot of people fall into that mistake, where, well, I can't change my circumstances because of X, Y, or Z, like, and I relate to that because I mean, again, I didn't have the worst upbringing, but I didn't have it easy. And I knew a lot of people that, in my opinion, I didn't know everything they were going through, but based on what they shared, I didn't feel like their life was that hard, like not that it wasn't hard in their perspective. What I'm trying to get to is that they get stuck thinking there's nothing they can do. Like their circumstances are defining them instead of acknowledging, okay, I can't change this. Like, why am I fighting it? Just accept it. What can I change? What can I work on? Okay,
Yeah.
like, and then attacking that. People don't move thinking that, oh, well, this is my situation. Poor me. Woe is me, like, but in reality, like when you accept it, you can then do something else to change
Yeah.
it.
And that's one of the first steps of designing your life. The next
Mhm.
one would be getting into the thick of it, talking about Odyssey plans,
Oh yeah.
oddities.
And
And before we get into that, actually, I like this little paragraph where it says, we all contain enough energy and talents and interests to live many different types of lives, all of which would be authentic and interesting and productive. Asking which life is best is asking a silly question. It's like asking whether it's better to have hands or feet. And that
oh
goes
yeah.
back to the idea that inside of us, or maybe that's a weird, funny way of putting it, but within our interests and what we can be good at, we can end up in different careers or in different cities or in different, even countries, and we could be perfectly happy and productive. So stop hanging on to this idea there's only one way. There's only one way that Joel or Carlos will have a productive and happy life. There's multiple ways. And that's one of the dysfunctional beliefs that people fall prey to, is They mention here, I need to figure out my best possible life, make a plan, and then execute it. But in finding out the best possible life, they never actually get anywhere because there's just too many. Like the reframe would be there are multiple great lives and plans within me, and I get to choose which one to build my way forward to next. That's it. Just find out what the next 3 to 5 years. I think that's the time period that the authors share. Like below 3 is maybe too short to make a significant change, but after 5, maybe it's too long for you to like hurry and actually get things done. But 3 to 5 years is a good time period.
Yeah, and I mean, I completely agree with what you're getting to. Is like these little tidbits, these little pieces of advice that the authors are giving can just really be powerful if you put them into practice. There's a let me see. There's an experience here, or is that you say an experience in that we can I can share it real quick about the Melanie. She taught sociology and liberal arts, and there was a thing she wanted to do, and I'm not going to share the whole experience, but long story short, she wanted $15 million to make a big change in her small college, and she
Yeah.
spent so much time to try to do this, and not that she could have never ever reached this goal. She probably could have, but it would have spent so much time for this one goal. But she reanalyzed that she was being stuck unnecessarily, that she found a different route where she could still have an impact in her college, and it ended up being something with dorms. And the real problem she wanted to attack was wanting to make a lasting impact on her college through social innovation, not funding an institute. She even acknowledged that she doesn't even know where she got the $15 million price tag. She said she just thought about it one day and she thought that that's what she needed to do. So it just taught me this lesson that if we reframe the problems and use curiosity and prototype different problems and it highlights here, he says, by reframing the problem, using curiosity, prototyping, and a little radical collaboration, Melanie made a permanent change in the campus culture. So just changing, reframing whatever problem we're feeling, things that we're being frustrated by.
Yeah.
We just change the perspective and then attack that and see what results happen.
Yeah. And I think actually you brought up a perfect story to illustrate this idea of prototyping, right? Because when you think of a prototype, me personally, before reading this book, I thought of architects, right? When they create or when they're about to build a building, they create this little model of it. Maybe that's a model, not a prototype. But, products usually have prototypes. So if you're creating a cell phone, maybe before you even spend money on, making the real one, you're going to have multiple prototypes, test them out, talk to people, see which one they like more. Well, the same thing with our life, right? Before we spend the amount of money it takes to build a skyscraper, well, maybe build a small model and see how it looks. Do you like it? Would you change something? It would be a lot more expensive to change the way a building's going to look once it's already built than it would once it's on the table and you can touch it and see it and play with it. Well, the same thing, for example, she wanted $15 or $50 million.
It was $15 million. Yeah, 15.
Yeah, it's a crazy amount. If she would have tested her idea before, maybe she could have done some of that stuff for less. The same thing with us, right? Like if we think that we hate where we're at, we don't like what we're doing. Oh, but in order to be happy, I need to move to Europe, work, in this fancy corporate job, make a lot of money, and, have a beautiful home. Well, that's probably not going to happen, right? Like you need to find a way to make that smaller and more achievable. Maybe start with one. Maybe, okay, first is getting a corporate job. Like I need to find that. Then it's maybe moving to Europe. And if you bite down those ideas you have, you might be able to actually get somewhere.
Yeah, because you can overwhelm yourself with these gigantic changes you want to make. And at the end of this chapter, he highlights how a lot of people are paralyzed by fear of that change. It mentions it's a pretty common paradoxical human behavior. Change is always uncertain, and there is no guarantee of success, no matter how hard you try. it makes sense to be fearful. The way forward is to reduce the risk and the fear of failure by designing a series of small prototypes to test the waters. So just highlighting your point that sometimes we're overwhelmed with the big goal we want to achieve, but just start small, make little prototypes to get you there. And then you'll, with time, potentially you could get there. I truly think you could. It's just, but if you make it too big, you might overwhelm yourself and paralyze yourself, and you do nothing, and you're just stuck again.
I mean, it's kind of a scary idea for someone like me, as we mentioned in previous books and in previous episodes. I don't feel like I'm a creative person. So sometimes when you feel like you're not creative, you miss out on some of these, important lessons. For example, like one of the big warnings I got from this book was most people fail not for lack of talent, but for lack of imagination. And that's the reality, right? Like when we look at people that maybe don't get to where they want to be, it's not because they didn't have the talent to do it. It's because maybe they got stuck on one way of doing it. They wanted to get from point A to point B, but maybe it was point A to point C to point D, then to point B. And if we start reframing that and using our imagination, we might be able to get what we want more.
And the book encourages to do mind mapping. I had a lot of fun with this exercise personally. I think if anyone puts this into practice, it's really fun. The what they encourage about doing this mind map is to put a central focus in the center. And maybe you've done it before at school or whatever. I don't remember doing it, honestly. I mean, I kind of have an idea of it, but I don't feel like I did it a lot. But practically speaking, it's fun, but it connects different ideas, and it makes you see how you can achieve whatever goal you're trying to get to by creating all these different ideas to get there. And it's a little tidbit that I thought was useful.
Yeah, and I mean, the book kind of flows and it's interconnected. Unfortunately, I didn't have the time to do some of these exercises, but I do plan on doing it in the next couple of days. And the first one we discussed was finding the things you enjoy, logging them, writing them down. Once you have those things you enjoy, you might be able to get some ideas to brainstorm and put into the mind map that you're discussing, right? Where you just start writing ideas. If, for example, if one of your things was biking in the mountains, you might, write down different activities or careers or things that come up to your head, when you think of that. And the trick here, according to the authors, is to put a time period. That way you don't overanalyze, and to not judge. Just write down whatever comes to your head. As long as it's related, it's in there, just put it down. The first step is just to get the ideas on paper or on a whiteboard or wherever it is you're using. Once you have those, then maybe you can start, finding some patterns, some of the things that are the main things that interest you, right? And once you have that, you can create what they mention an Odyssey plan. And these are at least three different unrelated plans that you can do, right? It's not plan A, plan B, plan C. It's not like your favorite, your least favorite, and going down. Like these are three things that you would love to do, but they're in conflict with each other. They might take place in a different country or in a different setting, or just involve like a completely different career path. And the way you end up doing them is, just put them down, write them down on paper for the next 5 years, what you'll be doing. And they can't be related, right? Like if it gives an example of if you want to be like a stockbroker and you write down your life of, okay, I'm going to work at a finance company, move to New York, do these things for the next 5 years. Okay, well, if the stock market closed down and there was no more stocks, what was your next plan? What else would you do? If that didn't work anymore, what else would you do? And then that's when you create your second, totally different life plan and Odyssey plan.
Yeah, and with this exercise, you attack this dysfunctional belief that I need to figure out my best possible life, make a plan, and then execute it. The reframe is there are multiple great lives and plans within me, and I get to choose which one to build my way forward next. So I think this exercise allows you to do this. It allows you to admit to yourself, well, there's actually multiple things I like doing and I probably would enjoy doing. So you don't feel overwhelmed if something doesn't work. You're like, okay, well,
Yeah,
I tried it. It was fun, the lessons I learned, but what else can I do? Well, you have other ideas you can work on and then work from there up.
exactly. Yeah. I think we're getting to a pretty. It's a short chapter, but it's actually a pretty cool chapter because it completely goes against what I thought. The name of the chapter is "How Not to Get the Job." How not
Oh
to
yeah,
get a
that was
job.
a great chapter. Let me get there. Yeah.
And to anyone listening, when you think about the process of getting a job, or at least what I thought the process of getting a job was, you go online, you look for job posts, you submit your resume, your cover letter, you write an email, you call them, and you wait for an interview. And if you're really serious about a job, you might follow up, give them another email, seeing if they're gonna do anything. Unfortunately, what I learned is that 90% of job seekers use that same method, but it has a success rate of less than 5%. Which means if I submit 20 job applications, maybe one will actually call me back and schedule an interview.
Yeah, that this was like eye-opening, personally. Because yeah, you can go indeed.com, right? And it's like, oh, there's work for days, right? Like there's so many job posts. And something that he highlighted was that these large companies typically post their most interesting jobs internally, only visible to those that work in the company. And he
Yeah,
also highlighted a lot of this is not politics, what is it called? Like where they just do it publicly so they don't get sued. They'll do a job listing, they'll interview a couple people, but they already have a choice in mind.
yeah,
It's like como tipo política, like I gotta do this legally, so I gotta give people options. And technically, if you already have someone in mind, you have an argument why, because their experience,
yeah.
yada, right?
Yeah, I believe he
But
calls it a phantom job listing.
yeah,
Like,
phantom job
yeah, it's a
listing.
fake job. Like you think you're applying for a job, but they already have someone in mind that they want to give that job to.
And that like broke my heart a little bit. I think a lot of people like that like love, oh man, this is a perfect job for me, and they do all this work and then
Yeah,
actually, sorry, the job has been taken for the past 3 weeks. We just got to do this so you don't sue us.
yeah, and I mean that can be especially heartbreaking if you feel. I mean, a lot of people have feel this. I mean, I haven't applied for a job in a while, but I feel like sometimes when I did, I was like, this is the perfect job. Like this is it. Like my experience would make sense. I think I could do this job. Just to not hear back, for months, and then eventually you learn that they're not gonna call you back. Well, imagine how it must feel like if you're an executive, like applying for Google, Facebook, or one of those, big companies that have a lot of different applicants, right? And a lot of them are not only qualified but overqualified for the job that they're searching. And it mentioned that it's not really because these companies are mean and evil, right? It's really hard. It's a difficult process to hire the right fit. But the way it's worked out, the way the risk and reward is, you know, set out, is kind of really risky for a big company or any company to hire the wrong person. Hiring wrong can be costly. You can get sued, terminated incorrectly, you end up paying a lot of money. And if you also think about it, if you're posting a job, this is because you need some work to get done. So not only do you run that risk, but also if you hire the wrong person, you are missing out on them doing the work that you needed. So what that does for a Google or a Facebook or a big company, even in your local area, is that they might even let go of a couple great candidates just because they can't risk it. They're looking for that one that perfectly, it doesn't mean that they don't make mistakes, but they're looking for that one that in their mind it's the lowest risk to reward ratio, where it's just going to work out. This is going to be a great fit from day one. And even if you would have been a great fit, they might be willing to lose you because they have a long list of other applicants waiting.
Yeah, and one of the points that this book highlighted or gave me some insight in is that a lot of these job postings are are designed in a way where like it sets up the applicant to fail almost because they're almost like wishful thinking. Oh, I want this perfect employee. So no, so you're
Yeah.
asking way too much, you know? I've actually been in a circumstance before in New York when I worked for this dealership or company, not dealership, this automotive photography company. And I was part of the hiring process where I had to hire people, interview them, see if it would be a fit. I mean, it was a fairly large company, but the quality of candidates were quite low. The pay wasn't amazing, so
Yeah.
a lot of people who applied were people that just are trying to use it as a transition, trying to get out of their funk or whatever.
Yeah.
So for me, like as the interviewee or no interviewer, it was like exhausting, bro. Like I remember like hating it because I keep repeating myself, and then people like are just bad employees, and then they have to fire me, they have to redo this all over again. So for me, like it gave me some insight of why maybe they create these hire within situations, even though maybe in your case you're a great employee and hardworking, but like being the guy hiring, man, it was so exhausting. Like if I could just there's someone I could hire within, I would have, honestly, because of how exhausting it is.
Yeah.
So it's something to be mindful of, that the odds are against you, but this book gives good practical advice of what you could do if you're trying to still do it the, I guess, old-fashioned way, or the way everyone does it through the internet.
Yeah. And one of the things they mentioned, if you are going to do it that way, the internet is going to be your source of employment, you're going to do applications and submit resumes, is it stressed the importance of having a strong LinkedIn and Google profile, right? If you know how to use LinkedIn and make those connections, you're going to be a lot more likely to find a good job, and one that you end up getting the interview, at least the interview, and possibly the job offer. One main
Yeah.
thing that I wanted to mention now is kind of another scary statistic, is in the United States, only 20% of all jobs available are posted on the internet, or anywhere for that matter. So when we're thinking about being successful, about, submitting a resume and a cover letter, a lot of the jobs that you're getting access to in Indeed or all these other, hiring websites
Platforms. Yeah.
are not going to be the great jobs. The great jobs, as you mentioned, they're going to be filled in internally by word of mouth, or you just have the connection with someone in the authority to give that job.
Mhm.
So if you have to do it that way, you can take some steps to improve your chances. But essentially what you want to do is get access to that other 80% of jobs. And I mean, I want to get into what we can do to do that, but I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, that fact that only 20% of jobs are posted on the internet.
For me, that could be scary, but it can also provide hope, right? That means that there is a job out there or a career that majority of the population doesn't have access to. But this book gives you advice of how to gain access through networking, and we're probably going to hit that point later. But for me, it can provide some hope, thinking like, okay, well, no one's responding to my emails, my cover letters, all this other stuff, all this work I'm doing. Sometimes it can be disheartening and maybe paralyzing. You don't do anything else. But this stat may motivate you, like, okay, like I gotta do things differently. Like let's not apply it this way. Let's try another route. And maybe you
Yeah.
want to go into that other route?
Yeah, because I wanted to highlight that point, or what we're discussing. In the beginning of the chapter, it talks a little bit about Kurt's life, right? And Kurt was a Yale graduate. And not only that, but I think he did a 2-year fellowship in Stanford as well. So this was a highly educated individual, but he had to move from Silicon Valley to Atlanta because he was having a baby and he wanted to move closer to his wife's family. So in that move, he decided, okay, I need a job. Obviously, he felt, due to his degrees, that he was going to have an easy time. And he worked really hard. He submitted 38 applications. The good old fashioned way of, just
That's,
emailing your resume with
I've
a
done that.
unique
I've done
cover
that.
letter.
Just
It was a numbers game. Unfortunately, even for someone like Kurt, highly educated from fancy universities, he got 8 no's and 30 nothings. Like, they didn't even bother responding. He
imagine
didn't.
our odds, bro.
Yeah. So that's kind of the reality, right? If you're looking for a job and you only have less than a 5% success rate, but not only that, you're missing out on 80% of the jobs out there, you're gonna have a hard time. It doesn't mean it's impossible. I mean, I've gotten a job the good old fashioned way before. You've done it
Same,
as well
same.
too. But I would never say that I got a dream job right away from any of these places. Those are not the ones that make it to the online posts. So how do you get the ones that do make it there? Well, it talks about getting live design interviews or doing some live design interviews. And this is, to me, the main point that I want to take with me from the book. Doing more live design interviews. Do you want to kind of explain what those are?
Yeah, so live design interviews is speaking to people, reaching out to people that are living the life you want to live or you respect in the career field that you enjoy. And the whole concept is you're not calling them or email them to get a job. You're not like selfishly like, "Oh, hire me." No,
Yeah.
like what they're encouraging is genuinely invite them for a coffee. Let me see if I can pull up the actual, because he provides like word for word where you can even email them.
Yeah, as you're doing that, I wanted to mention Kurt a little bit more
Okay, go for
because
it.
he brings him back into this point of the book, right? He was not happy after those 38 failures, we could say, right? He applied for 38 jobs, he got 8 no's and 30 nothings, but then he had remembered the lessons that he learned from this class. So what he started doing was doing some live design interviews. So he contacted people in the area, not as an interview, not as saying, "Hey, do you have any openings?" That probably wouldn't have worked, but just kind of a conversation. Like, what do you do? How did you get there? You know, look, being more interested in what they were doing instead of appearing interesting and kind of selling himself. Well, in that process, we could say accidentally, with 56 conversations that were probably very enjoyable, he got 7 different high quality job offers. And included was one dream job, right? Like, we can call this like maybe not a fantasy dream job, but like a really, really good job.
Mhm.
All from doing 56 of this. From 38, he got nothing. But for a little bit more, he got 8 quality offers. And that's kind of the benefit of taking this approach to looking for work. Even though it's going to be a lot slower, you might feel like you're not making enough progress. It's the success rate of doing this method is a lot higher.
And I think the reason for the success rate being so high is because one, you put a lot of these resumes that these chapters kind of highlight is that no one sees a physical resume anymore. It's all they it's keyword based, key search word based. But in
Yep.
this case, you're sitting in front of somebody who doesn't have to impact your life, but has a potential to do so. And you get to express your passion, get to show interest in them, get them talking,
Yeah.
expressing their passion, and highlights how a lot of them brought it up to him, right? Like, oh, you seem very interested in this. Are you looking for a position? Like they
Correct.
offer themselves.
Yeah.
And I think that's such a cool little hack. And the thing is, don't go again. The advice isn't do this maliciously, right? Like, oh, I'm doing it, for my own personal game only.
Yeah.
But if you just do it for the goal of learning and growing and seeing how they did it, how did they make it to their position?
Yeah.
One, at least bare minimum gives you guidance on what to do next. Oh, well, they did this. They shadowed a career here for a little bit. And that's something I can do. It gives you an actionable thing to do.
Yeah. And I mean,
So
it's
it
something
could,
that. Go ahead.
no, go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was going to say something the book doesn't mention, but I think it's important in this case is to be genuine, right? If you go into
Mm-hmm.
this live design interviews thinking they're a job interview. Like you're gonna start selling yourself and saying, well, you're a good fit. They're gonna read right through it. They're gonna be like, okay, what Carlos or Joel wants is to get a job. Unfortunately, like when they decide that, their mentality is gonna change completely. Now they're judging you.
Yeah.
Now they're like, is this the right fit for this? And if they have openings, it might work, but you just decrease your chances. Whereas if you go into this interview kind of thinking, I'm going to meet this interesting person that's doing something that I find interesting, and I'm going to learn more about them, and nothing's going to come out of it. A lot of times something will. And if it happens to be that in the conversation, you know, everything's going really well, and you feel like, you know what, I'm going to go for it. I'm going to take this risk. It's a higher risk. You should wait for them to initiate it from a genuine conversation. But I found, I think, what you were referring to, it says you can tell them, the more I learn about XYC company and the more people I meet here, the more fascinating it becomes. I wonder what steps would be involved in exploring how someone like me might become a part of this organization. And the way you phrase that is very important, right? Because you might feel tempted to just be like, oh, are there any job openings? That's not the right answer, because he can easily just say no. Kind of as a default answer, just, oh, no, there isn't. In the other question, it's more of an open-ended question, right? Like, he might tell you, oh, the first step is to get this degree or get this license or, you know, do something else that you haven't done. Or he might tell you, actually, you know, there's nothing right now, but let's stay in touch. Maybe in the next couple of months, something comes up. We should do this again. And if you do that 50, 60 times, it's going to be a lot more fruitful than if you submit 60 different random resumes online that they maybe they'll see, maybe they don't. You know, I saw something funny in a movie once where they had a stack of resumes, and the hiring manager, it's kind of like it's supposed to be a funny scene, but he gets rid of half. He's like, what do you mean? You're getting rid of half? You're not even reading them? He's like, that half is unlucky. I don't want to hire an unlucky person.
Oh, he gives it to the bottom half. The odds are against him if he landed in the bottom half of the stack of paper. It
sounds funny, but even if they're actually taking their time to analyze, it might end up being luck at the end. It might end up being something like that.
Yeah, the odds are just against you. The thing is, they're not. Like, they're not. Like, they're not going to spend that time, because by doing so, they're sacrificing whatever their other job is. Like, their job isn't just to hire people. They have other responsibilities. Yeah. So the odds are just severely against you when you just apply the old-fashioned way. Yeah. But there is so much value of just reaching out. I want to talk about maybe the bad rep the word networking has. Oh, how do you, like, especially you, right? You work in the real estate world, right? And I feel like networking is something that's talked about a lot in the real estate world. And the dysfunctional belief says networking is just hustling people. It's slimy. Before I give the reframe, personally, is this something you've experienced yourself, like being in that world where networking helps a lot in real estate and all that good stuff? Like, what's your opinion on this? Or was your opinion until you read this book?
Well, there's a common saying amongst real estate investors, and that is, your net worth is your network, or your network is your net worth, right? And that kind of highlights the importance that they give, right? The more people you know that are doing the things that you're doing, the more likely that you'll, you know, come across deals or different opportunities that you can partake in. But I definitely resonated with the dysfunctional belief, right? Because I personally am not very good at networking. I'm hoping to become better after reading this book and applying some of this lessons. As I mentioned, my main takeaway is doing more design live interviews. So I want to meet with people that are doing cool things, maybe take them out to coffee, lunch, and kind of see what they're doing, kind of like how they're doing it, what's going on.
How do they get there?
That's going to, you know, kind of tick two boxes for me. One is I'm going to get to meet cool people in their careers, but also at the same time, I'm going to be networking and, you know, getting to meet some of the people that are doing cool stuff here in the local area. But now I don't know if you had any beliefs on networking, because I know that you network as well too.
Yeah, I think what this book is helping me adjust is even my mindset with networking. I think that's the key thing to do better at networking. I think in my core, I felt the way this is described, right? That I'm just trying to hustle people, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's bad because you won't get a genuine connection with people. You won't like
Yeah.
you can read into people's that vibe that they're giving off. Like they just want something from you. They're not genuinely interested in you. They're not trying to help you go anywhere. They just want something for them. And I think maybe unknowingly, that's how I approach networking, where it's like back in my mind, that's in my head. What are you going to give me? And that's such a bad mindset, right? That's such a bad mindset. Yeah, because it's just not genuine. I mean, it becomes slimy, right? But the reframe, if I may I can give it now. The reframe the book provides or the authors provide is that networking is just asking for directions. And the way they further describe this situation is like that experience of that you're walking down in your local area and someone slows down and asks for directions, and you give them directions to the local coffee shop, entertainment, wherever they're going to go. After that interaction, you don't feel used, right? If anything, you feel like, oh, I wasn't planning to do something good today, but look at that. I did something good today. I helped somebody get where they were going. And I think this brought me some relief where if I view networking that way, not only can I help people, right? Because sometimes even in your case, like in our personal circumstances, maybe we can help people, but we feel like, no, well, like I gotta like take care of whatever knowledge I have and really create like this cage, it's all mine. You're actually pushing people away from your personal growth. No, giving is the best way to do it. If you give, you will get more in return. And I think readjusting my mindset of seeing networking as like we all acknowledge our circumstance. We're just all trying to be better, not by being crooked or slimy, but genuinely. I genuinely want to grow, but I also want to help you if there's any way I can grow. And that will create a better interaction with whoever you're trying to network with.
Yeah. And I think they put a great example, because I start to think about this example of someone asking you for directions and having been on both sides of that coin, right? Like there's times where maybe I've been lost in a new town, or, asking someone, oh, what's a good coffee shop? I mean, that's another version of that. Like you're in a town, you're not a local, but you have someone that you know, or just a total stranger, and they seem like they would know. So you ask them, hey, what coffee do you recommend around here? They're happy to help you. But if it's the other way, right? If someone's asking you, oh, what coffee do you recommend in your local town? You're happy to help them too, right? You don't lose anything. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean that next day you're going to talk on Facebook or FaceTime and be best friends. It's a very low risk, low level interaction. You're not going to become best friends with these people. As a matter of fact, that's the reason that can happen. Like if you knew that after answering this person's question, you had to talk to them the next day and the following day, you might not. You might not want all of that. But if it mentions here, most of us like being helpful. It's hardwired into our DNA. We are social creatures. And helping one another is one of the things that makes us feel best. There's more happiness, in giving to others than it is in receiving. But if you understand that in both ways, it might free you up to network a bit more and do some of these life design interviews, right? Because if you understand that, hey, as long as I'm not putting a lot of pressure in this person that I want to meet for coffee or for lunch, and I'm just interested in what they're doing, I'm not going to, become their best friend. I'm not going to bother them every week with more follow-ups and, hey, do you have any job openings? Hey, do you have any job openings? Then there might be a great chance that they are willing to go and meet for a Starbucks and kind of discuss how they got into their career, or how they got, for example, how you got into podcasting, or how did you move, across a different country, like you can also provide value during these conversations. And don't say it like, oh, I'm just taking. It's going to be an interchange of this value.
And maybe start with that mindset of what can I provide first? How you mentioned, like, and it could be something like as simple as buying a coffee. Like you're providing some sort of value. Like, hey, like I just want to buy you coffee, a little lunch, a little light lunch. Those little things that we do taking that initiative to give first might open doors for them to reciprocate giving back to you.
Yeah. And this is the main point that I didn't want to miss on this next chapter. And is we need to reframe our job search for an offer search.
Oh,
And
yeah.
that might seem like the same thing, right? Like when you're looking for a job, but it's totally different, right? Because when you're looking for a job and you really like, let's say you desperately need a job, you moved into this new town, bills are coming up, you have a little bit of savings left, and you just need a job. As long as it fits your schedule and what you're trying to do, you're going to take it. But that puts a lot of pressure on both of you, right? On the person interviewing you, because they're trying to decide what the best fit for this job is. And on yourself, you might start maybe not lying, but exaggerating and being, oh yeah, I'm the perfect guy for this. Like I've done this my whole life. And you
Of
end up
course
in
I'm a doctor.
yeah, you end up in a position where you don't actually enjoy what you're doing. If you have the luxury, and what I mean by that is, if no one's coming up to collect the bill or like kick you out of your home, then you should strive to do an offer search and get as many offers as you can. And yeah, that ends up being more authentic, energetic, persistent, and playful while you pursue your next position or opportunity. Because at the end of the day, people don't hire a resume, no matter how good it looks. They hire people. So if you start meeting with people, connecting with them, trying to see if they have any offers, instead of, oh, I'm trying to get this job, it's going to be much less pressure, and it's much more likely that you'll end up getting hired for the position.
Yeah, and something that made me think when I was reading this is the impact. Sometimes we view this as a one-way transaction, like they're the ones offering the job and I need the job, right? So you feel like kind of vulnerable of but I think this book made me think about the reality of how you should interview them as well. Like you shouldn't, I mean, again, like you mentioned, if you have the privilege of not being under pressure to find work, is to interview them, right? Take the initiative. Okay, like, does this actually benefit me? Like even if the person interviewing you, usually they always ask at the end, oh, do you have any questions? Usually people end up like, oh, no, I'm good, because you feel that vulnerability, like, oh, they have, I can't just ruffle their feathers because they won't hire me. But thinking about these offers is important to be able to, I mean, if you have many offers, this interview doesn't have so much weight where you can interview them back, and see if it's the right fit for you too.
Yeah, exactly. So that takes us almost to the end of the book. And, to anyone listening, there's a lot more information, a lot more, very cool little exercises you can do in the chapters that, due to time, we just couldn't share with you. But in the chapter Building a Team, it talks about the importance of having people around you that help you design this life. And it could be career, professional relationships, but it could also be just your friends and family and the information they give, the counsel they provide. Something that I really enjoyed about this chapter, it kind of broke down something that I had never differentiated, which is counsel and advice. When I think of advice and counsel, I thought they were synonyms. If someone gives you counsel or someone gives you advice, it's the same thing. Well, the authors here made a distinction between the two. And here the definition to start this conversation. It says, counsel is when someone is trying to help you figure out what you think. Advice is when someone is telling you what he or she thinks. And it gives you a very good recipe for knowing if you're hearing advice or counsel. It says, anytime you hear, if I were you, you're getting advice. If someone says, if I were you, what he really means is, if you were me. And that's how you know. It doesn't mean that it's bad, right? Because if you're talking to someone you trust, someone that, has the same values as you, advice is fine. The authors say advice is fine to get. You just want to be very careful about actually taking it. And the reason you want to be careful is not because they mean you harm, is because, as it mentions, they're telling you what they would do, but their life is different. So maybe in your circumstances, you gotta, take more things into consideration. And that's the first bit on advice. I don't know if you want to mention something before we move on to counsel.
I think that when I was reading this, it also reminded me like, because the whole point is building that team around you that pushes you forward, right? That helps you and you can help them. It also just remind me the dangers of having, maybe you think you have a team around you, right? Like you think you
Yep.
have that team, but in reality they're holding you back, and that's a hard pill to swallow, because maybe you grew up with these friends all your life, or um, what have you, the team that you have around you, but they can be the biggest anchor or the biggest propeller for you to go forward, right? Like, and that's why it's important to build those people around you. And this book um, highlights the importance of supporters, players, and people who are intimate. And it breaks them apart from each other, what they are.
Yeah.
Um, and I think the one that I related to the most, or not, the one I thought was really valuable is players. Even though it's short, it says players are the active participants in your life design projects, especially your ongoing work-related and avocational projects and prototypes. These are the people you actually do things with, your coworkers in the classic sense.
Yeah.
So those people you're surrounded by, that you're trying to reach certain goals, they can again hold you back or push you forward. I think that was something that I'm trying to be really mindful of. And even though it's a hard thing to do, to not let go of people, because you can still be friendly and check up on
Yep.
them once in a while, but not let their opinion or the way they're unsatisfied with life hold me back too.
Yeah. Yeah, because a lot of times it can have the best interests. Like, it gives an example here of an ER, emergency doctor, who advises everyone he knows, don't ever ride a motorcycle. Why does he do it? Because he's more than anyone seen the results that could come. I mean, it's plain and simple. Motorcycles are a lot more dangerous. If you have an accident on a motorcycle, it's much more likely to result in casualty than in a car or a truck. Now, there's another side to this, and that's someone. It is a fine artist, a successful artist, mentioned that what he was motorcycling is when he gets his ideas, and that has resulted in a lot of beautiful paintings. So, does the advice of the doctor, is it bad advice? Maybe not, but maybe this fine artist is not going to take it because it still provides a lot of value in his life and it's worth that risk. Well, the same thing with us, right? You can hear advice and you can take it as what it means. Someone cares about you. And, as long as they're not really giving you bad advice, it comes from the best heart. Like, they care
Mhm.
about you. They want you to do good, but maybe they just don't understand everything that's implied in it. And I personally, like, when I read this book, it kind of propelled me to seek counsel more than advice, right? Because the difference with counsel is when someone's trying to help you figure out what you think, right? And it's more like, it's totally different than advice where it's not, oh, do this. It's more like, oh, well, have you stopped to think about this?
Mhm.
Have you meditated on this point? Have you taken this into consideration? They might remind you of things that you're not taking into consideration when making this decision, but they still give you that freedom, or maybe not, we shouldn't call it freedom, but that responsibility of making the final decision on you. And the reason I really like that is because, if you take advice, right, let's say from someone you really trust, like a parent or a teacher, and along the way you find difficulties, you might not be able to overcome them because you might start looking back and be like, hey, you told me to take this road and now there's
Yeah.
a bear right in front of me. Like, whereas if you took that road and you realize, okay, there might be a bear coming up, well, you can do what it takes to fight that bear and, overcome it. Counsel is a bit more valuable to me at this point in life because it doesn't rob me of that responsibility. I still know that whatever I choose after meditating on it and, analyzing all the information that I had to, I have to live with. I'm the one that's responsible for that decision.
And it also reminds you of maybe how you give advice, right? Or
Yeah.
personally, for me, I think there is more value in putting ourselves in someone else's shoes and seeing, instead of, like you mentioned, what I would do in your shoes, or what would you do if you were me?
Yeah.
Instead of doing that, be like sitting down and actually meditating on them. And I think something loving to do, even like if someone, something I'm gonna try to practice maybe going forward, is that if someone does come up to me and may ask for some advice for whatever reason, right? I don't have a lot of advice to give, but if someone did, maybe given the validation of like, okay, I hear you. Let me chew on this, and I'll get back to you. Sometimes for me, especially because I talk so much, my ADHD or whatever, I feel like I have to give them a response in the moment. But I think something caring to do is to like step back, like, okay, I'm hearing you. I'm sorry you're going through this or what have you. Let me sit down and meditate and see if I can find some counsel I could give you instead
Yeah.
of a quick answer that's not loving or beneficial to anyone.
That's a good takeaway as well, because I imagine you give a lot of advice or a lot of counsel.
No, man. No.
You're a great source of wisdom for a lot of people.
No, man. I've just gone through a lot of. I've made a lot of mistakes. I think that's why. Maybe we can
Okay.
end. Maybe we can end with like our last, one last quote each or something. Or what do you think?
Yeah, let's do it. Something I found interesting were kind of the conclusion of the chapter. And well, actually, before I give my conclusion, I really like this dysfunctional belief and reframe, because once you read this book, or at least once you listen to this episode and you take some takeaways and you're like, okay, I want to try doing this, whether it is in my career search, my new job search, or just in life in general, I want to use some of these tools to reframe some ideas and kind of propel forward. You're never going to get there, right? Because this dysfunctional beliefs, I finished designing my life, the hard work is done, and everything will be great. Now I can just lay back and relax. But the reframe, the more reasonable reframe, would be you never finish designing your life. Life is a joyous and never-ending design project of building your way forward. And it's exactly the way it is, right? Because I don't know if this has happened to you, but maybe when it comes to work, you can be in a stage of your life where, okay, this is doable. Like, I really enjoy doing this. But maybe 3 years down the line, okay, this is not it anymore. If you're constantly designing, you're never going to be in that position where like, oh, I don't like this again. Like, don't sleep there. Just keep designing, and you'll have the life that you're really looking for. And that leads me to my last thought, which is this idea of always being curious, right? There's something interesting about everything. And I think that kind of resonates with the idea behind this podcast. We are finding lessons in different books, and we are not literature experts. We're not the ones that,
Yeah.
break it down, the theme and all the author, like what he intended and what he meant. But we're just getting lessons. We're curious. There's something to learn from every book. We don't have the time to go over all of them, but we're going to go over the ones that we find interesting. And something that's interesting here, it's nothing is boring to everyone. And that's very true. Like, doing taxes might be something that we don't like doing. Like, we hate that process. But maybe there's someone out there that loves to read the tax code and, knows the ins and outs, and just that's his life. He really loves it. And
Let
if
me
you have
get
this
his number so
mentality,
I can do my
yeah.
taxes.
If you have that mentality of, I can find something interesting about everything, you're going to have a happier life, I feel like.
Yeah, no, those are beautiful concluding thoughts or things that you found so much value in. There was two that maybe we didn't talk about. Oh no, we did. But this quote that I really liked was, "Life is not a problem to be solved; it's an adventure to be lived." And I think that's personally how I'm trying to live my life. I think a lot of the problems we face, or I face personally, is to just view it as what it is, a small problem in my life, but not a defining problem. Like, this is where I'm stuck at, or nothing can change, but enjoying the adventure. And I think of like I'm very happy where I'm at. I'm very grateful, how far I've progressed or whatever. But all the little moments in my life, there's like value in that. I remember I look back fondly of that adventure. Like, I think of those who are listening probably don't know this, but Carlos and I actually worked together at a chocolate store in New York, and I had a lot of fun. Would I want to do that for life? Probably not,
Okay.
but it was fun in that moment, right? There's like this value that I look back, and there were some hard days, but it was fun. It was fun to me. Again, I just reiterate the thing that I got from that quote, that just life is an adventure to be lived, is not to be focused, because we could have been there in that moment, like, bro, I'm 22. What am I doing here working at this chocolate store? Like, I'm wasting time, whatever, right? We could have thought really negatively. But if we saw it more so as, oh, this is just a bump in my road. It's getting me, it's a little stair. It's a staircase of my life. This is not where I end. And if you view it that way, your current circumstance isn't so overwhelming. It's not like, oh, like, this is how if you're unhappy right now, I'll be unhappy forever. No, like, if you view it as, oh, just an adventure, this is a tiny hiccup, and I'll get out of it. I'll get out of it somehow, some way. So I think that's why I like that quote there. It encourages me to shift my perspective on my current circumstance.
Exactly. And something that you made me think of was you were explaining that is this idea that we discussed in the beginning as well of the book. And is, if you know where you're at and you know where you're going, you don't have to know like the way you're going to get there, right? But you should know the direction, right? Like when we were at Lint, even when we were there, maybe we were like, okay, this is not what I want to do for the next 20 years. But we knew that it wasn't in the opposite direction. Like, we knew that, we just got to pay the bills right now, and we're going to try, our best to find something else in the future. So as long as you know that, as long as you know, okay, this is not going the opposite direction of where I want to go. The opposite direction would have been having no job and continuing to increase your debt. That would have been problematic.
Exactly. Well, we almost got close to,
which we felt pretty close to. Maybe we should do a book on debt and money.
I know we should.
We were pretty close to some mistakes there, but that's it. This is the book. It has a jacket to it, but if you guys want to read it, there's a lot of valuable information, and we hope that you had some value from this episode.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. It was just so much to get out of, and like Carlos highlighted, there's a lot of chapters we actually had to jump over to not, so you guys don't hear our voices too long. Thank you for anyone who's listened thus far. We appreciate you. This is episode number 3, and what's next book? What do we think? That's my choice, right?
Yeah, it's your choice. Yeah. Your call.
There is the book recommendation here. I think it's called The Paradox of Choice.
Paradox of Choice. Okay.
I think that's what it's titled. I'll get back to you to see if that's the book we're going to read.
Okay.
Anyway, thank you for our listeners, and we'll see you next week.